This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Greetings from the Philippines to the world. We are on Facebook Live on Eagle News and also on our streaming site, eaglenewslive.com. Watch us on our YouTube channel at Eagle News. I am Cesar Vallejos. Welcome to Open for Business. Join me discover the latest news and information in business around the world. Stay ahead of the curve from vision to action. The Philippines has long-standing relationships with many countries. One of the longest among these relationships is with Australia, where both nations shared interests and values supported by strong people-to-people links. Australia and the Philippines mark 75 years of bilateral relations, and as we observe it today, that cooperation has grown with an ever-increasing people-to-people links, development assistance towards sustainable growth, and an expanding trade and investment that enhance the two nations' economic ties. And today, Open for Business is honored and privileged to have with us the Ambassador of Australia to update us on the increasing breadth and depth of Australia-Philippine relations and where that relationship is going in the coming years. Before His Excellency Stephen Robinson joins the set, here's a business report. Japan law loosens rules for self-driving cars, and here are the details. If you are stuck in traffic on a Japanese highway in a self-driving car, you might be able to kick back with a sandwich and check your phone under new legislation in the country. The law passed Tuesday and published on the lower house website takes effect from next year ahead of the Tokyo Olympics and offers a slight loosening of the current restrictions on autonomous vehicles. There were a few immediate official details about the new rules, but GG Press agency said it would come into effect in May and would apply only to limited circumstances, including traffic jams on a highway. It would allow drivers in those situations to use smartphone behind the wheel as their vehicle drives itself, so long as they're able to switch to manual driving immediately in case of emergency, the agency said. There is no specific language in either existing Japanese legislation or the new law that bans reading, using a laptop or eating while driving, meaning drivers of autonomous cars could sit back with a book and their lunch if they would find themselves snarled in traffic. While the new legislation eases restrictions, it still leaves Japan behind some other countries where autonomous rideshare vehicles have been operating in limited areas. Self-driving cars are a key sector for development in the auto industry, but there have been recent setbacks, including several accidents last year. Japan is hoping the 2020 Games will be a chance to showcase cutting-edge tech projects in the country, but autonomous transport is also an important sector for a nation suffering labor shortages and a shrinking, aging population. When Open for Business returns, we will have His Excellency Stephen Robinson, Ambassador of Australia to the Philippines. Open for Business will return. Stay with us.
Hey there, Arnie Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net25. I am Teacher Sally, and this is Kid Kwento, one of Net25 Kids' online shows. Kid Kwento is now on TV. You can watch us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4 to 4:30 p.m. Also watch Anong Sa Inyo with Ate DJ every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 to 4:30 p.m. Sa Kid Kwento, ang aming motto ay, let's all read to succeed! Hooray! Kita-kita tayo ha! Bye-bye!
Abangan ngayong linggo sa Season 4 ng Young Ones, Upon a Time.
We are open for business, and we are here with His Excellency Ambassador Stephen Robinson, Ambassador of Australia to the Philippines. Ambassador, thank you very much for gracing the show. We learned that you have been with a lot of ASEAN countries, and our first question is, how is Philippines different from the other countries that you've been to?
That's a really good question. And the Philippines is different, I think, because of the extent and the breadth and the depth and the length of the bilateral relationship between Australia and the Philippines. As you might be aware, the relationship with the Philippines goes back nearly 75 years in terms of our bilateral diplomatic relationship, starting back on the 22nd of May 1946.
As a matter of fact, earlier I mentioned that it's one of the longest diplomatic relationships that both our nations have.
That's right. So if you go down to the Manila Hotel, which I did the first weekend I was here, there's a plaque in the Manila Hotel which is there to signify that the Australian Consulate General opened on the 22nd of May 1946. So we're going to celebrate 75 years in 2021. But the relationship is much deeper and longer than that. You know, it goes back through the Second World War, when indeed Australian troops were fighting with American and Filipino troops to, look after the freedom of the Philippines. But in trade terms, it goes back to the late 1800s because we were engaged with the Philippines in the late 1800s in terms of goods coming from the Philippines down to northern Queensland.
That's interesting. So there's already, as early as that, there were already, there's commerce between us.
Lots of commerce between us and lots of interaction. And of course, when you look at what the relationship looks like now, it's underpinned by defence, security, intelligence linkages, lots of development assistance linkages going back over 50 or more years, but then people-to-people links. And it's the people-to-people links, the warmth of that relationship, which I find so very satisfying and so wonderful to explore.
But you said about that commerce, and as early as that time, would you still remember what products were traded during that time?
So my recollection is we're talking about elements of coffee that were coming down, coffee and perhaps some rice that was coming down to Australia back in the late 1800s, and Queensland was the area that was being directed to. And of course over the years our trade relationship has blossomed, but there's still more that we can do in terms of our overall bilateral trade.
With the 75 years of relationship, can you give us some highlights of that?
Yeah, so I think the highlights has been the consistency with which Australia has supported the Philippines in terms of its development assistance, in trying to work with the Philippines to find areas of common partnership. And, each year Australia does a great deal in terms of development assistance partnership with the Philippines, and I'm very proud of what we do together. I'm also very proud of the defence relationship, and that's been of long standing. As you might be aware, we've got a SOFA, a Status of Forces Agreement with the Philippines that was ratified back in 2012-2013, and Australia is the only country beyond the United States that has such an agreement with the Philippines, and I think that says a great deal about the strength of our relationship. And if you also think about what happened during the siege of Marawi back in 2017, that saw the Australian defence and security relationship with the Philippines elevated, and I'm very, very pleased with what's occurred as a result of that cooperation between us, because our defence relationship now is particularly strong, and I think will remain so. And that goes to more than 8,000 troops that we've now trained for the Philippine Armed Forces in counter-terrorism activity. And the ongoing support that the Australian military provides to the Philippine Armed Forces, which I think is very, very important. And the work that we do also between our respective police forces. And so there's lots there that puts a very firm foundation on what is then the economic, trade and people-to-people relationship between
Ambassador,
us.
you mentioned about defense and security support. What can you elaborate more on the specifics in terms of training, equipment, modernization?
Of course. Well, as part of the Philippines Armed Forces modernisation program, Australia is very keen to assist with that. And we've had a task force up here, Task Force 629, that's been in the Philippines now, going back to the time of the Marawi siege, providing ongoing training support to the Philippine Armed Forces. And that is continuing. At the end of this year, it transfers into a new relationship that will be ongoing, and we had our Chief of Defence Force up here in June, and he reached that agreement.
We look forward to that.
Well, he was here, and we reached agreement with the Armed Forces of the Philippines in terms of the Joint Australian Training Team that will commence its activities at the beginning of 2020 and carry forward the training support that Australia has provided. So I'm delighted to be able to provide that. Of course, in terms of the police relationship, countering sexual online exploitation of children is really quite critical, and also human trafficking. And so we have a Safer Kids program, which is an $8 million program going out over a number of years, working with agencies here in the Philippines, the Philippine National Police, which is seeking to stop and inhibit online sexual exploitation of children, which is such a major concern for all of us. And I'm very proud of that program as well. So there's many, many aspects to our relationship, but there's some of them that we're particularly pleased with at the current time.
Now, you mentioned, Ambassador, on the defense and security issues, and the support from Australia is really strong on that. My question now is that with ASEAN, I think, as you also, as I've read and I've heard you talk about it, the relationship and the position of ASEAN is very critical, especially now that, of course, we are in a very strategic position, and there's a lot of global headwinds, that affects the region. How important is, of course, aside from defense and security issues in the ASEAN region?
Oh, I think ASEAN is absolutely fundamental for the Philippines, but it is indeed for Australia too. And Australia has been a strong supporter of ASEAN unity for many, many years. My own view is that the Philippines has a role in ASEAN, and potentially a bigger role in ASEAN, given the size of the Philippines, the strength of its economy, its critical position geostrategically, geopolitically. I think the Philippines could have a greater say in ASEAN into the future, and so we're working with the Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs to support and endorse the Philippines' approach as it engages with ASEAN.
Okay. A lot of our viewers, Ambassador, will be interested to know how many Filipinos are working in Australia. The last data we checked was 300,000. Is it growing?
It's growing at a quite dramatic rate, and we're very, very proud of those statistics, because the Filipino population in Australia now stands as the 5th largest ethnic grouping that we've got in Australia. So
it's the 5th largest ethnic group at 300,000?
At 304,000 is the latest stats that I've got.
Okay.
Most of those down in Sydney. But it's growing dramatically because of the strong education links that we've got and the strong travel between us. There are 33 direct flights each week between Australia and the Philippines, which is pretty significant. A good proportion of those going to Sydney. And then a good proportion of the Filipinos down in Australia live in the Sydney area and also down in Melbourne. I'm going down to Sydney in early September, and I'm going to catch up with the Filipino community at a couple of functions in early September. I'm really looking forward to it because when you look at the strength of that relationship and the contribution that Filipinos make to Australian society as the 5th largest grouping in our country, that's really important. And you can just see what the potential is for that to grow in future years. Because the education piece, I think, is really important too. We've got nearly 13,000 Filipinos studying in Australia,
which is huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It is huge. And at the beginning, of
which university?
So right around the country, you know, universities in Queensland, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth. Pretty much all the universities, there's quite a spread of students, and they're right across virtually all sectors of orientation in the universities. We became the #1 draw card for Filipino students right around the world, overtaking the United States and Canada and a whole range of other countries, and that's a tremendous statistic. I'm delighted with that, and I think that heralds an enormous lot of prospects for the future. The other bit that I'm also excited about too is the connection between our universities. So not only do we have Filipino students studying down in Australia, but the universities in Australia are reaching out to the Philippine universities. And I've been privileged to be at a number of signing ceremonies recently where there's been MOUs between Australian universities and Filipino universities signed that exchange not only lecturers but also students and work on joint syllabuses for the courses that they run. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting because Eagle Broadcasting Corporation has also a partnership with one of the universities here in the Philippines, and that's the New Era University.
Right.
And I hope there could be partnerships that can be developed by the embassy with the New Era University as well. Now, my question, Ambassador, is what's the competitive advantage of Australian universities? Why are Filipinos choosing to study there over the other universities in other parts of the world?
I think the competitive advantage comes down to a number of things. The quality of tuition. Because I think the quality is world class. Obviously, we've got leading world class universities right around Australia. The cost of education, and the fact that education, whilst there is indeed quite a cost in going to university, that's highly competitive. And I also think that the proximity between Australia and the Philippines is another factor. So families wanting to visit their kids who are studying at university, or the students wanting to come back to the Philippines, it's only 7.5 hours between Manila and Sydney, so that's pretty enticing. It means you can fly overnight and get down to Sydney, or fly during the day and you're here in virtually no time at all, and that's really good. The other factor too is that there's a Filipino community in Australia that is there to provide support to students that are studying at university. One of the things that I did as I was preparing to come up to Manila was to reach out to the Filipino community in Sydney, and there's a number of people studying down there. Obviously they came into our office in Sydney, and I learnt about how they were studying at university and the support that the Filipino community provided to them, which made them feel very warm and settled beyond the welcome that they get in Australia. So I think that's a very significant factor too.
For education, Ambassador, what specific programs do they offer? Are there scholarship offers, exchange student programs?
So, one of the things that Australia offers is a thing called the Australia Awards. And these have been going now for quite a number of years, and they are essentially scholarships that we provide for Filipino students to go down to Australia. And there's about 100 of these on offer for the Philippines each year, and we've got nearly 100 people down studying in these scholarships presently. And that is really significant. That gives people the opportunity to do their Masters or their PhD, and they then come back and join Australian alumni groups here in the Philippines. And there's a program where when you come back from Australia from one of these scholarships, you have to give back to the Philippines in your area of study. And that's really important in ensuring that the education that the people gain down in Australia is translated into practical outcomes for the Filipino people here on the return of those students. So I love that. There's also another thing called the New Colombo Plan, which is where Australian students come up to the Philippines and study here. And we've got a number
For
of
how
students up to a year, 2 years,
Okay.
and they come up and do part of their study here. And that gives them the opportunity to understand Filipino culture, to travel around the country, and to build those people-to-people links between us. So pretty terrific.
Exciting on education. Now Ambassador, we go to business.
Yeah.
I also learned that there's about 300 Australian
Yep.
companies here in the Philippines. What's what are the updates of
Yeah.
businesses? Are more Australian businesses interested to invest here in the Philippines? Because, of course, we have a growing GDP, a good macroeconomic fundamentals, and the figures are really quite rosy. What's the expectation of Australian businessmen as far as the economic outlook of the Philippines?
Well, I think for the Australian businesses that are here, and there's more than 300 of them now, employing more than 44,000
Wow.
Filipinos here in the Philippines. That's a terrific statistic. But when you look at the prospects for business over the next 10 years, and as I settled in earlier this year and went and spoke to the IMF, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, virtually all of them will say to you, look at the prospects for the Philippines. Here's an economy that's growing at least 6% GDP growth every year for the next decade. That's remarkable. If we had that in Australia, there'd be non-stop partying. It would just be so good. If we had that statistic, we don't, regrettably. But for Australian businesses,
Our audiences would like to know what's the current GDP growth.
it's perhaps a little less than half
Okay.
of that, perhaps down in Australia. So therefore, we're full of admiration for the direction that the Philippines economy is going in. And for an Australian investor, an Australian company, the question really is, why wouldn't you be here in the Philippines when you see what's happening in terms of the Philippines economy and the prospects for the future? The infrastructure investments that the Philippines is making now is very, very enticing for Australian firms. And there's a whole range of things that Australian firms offer to the Philippines, particularly in terms of science, technology and innovation, that makes Australia a good option for Philippines companies to look at in terms of encouraging further investment. But for me, I'm also pushing Australian firms to get involved in the economy here, because of those 300 plus firms that we've got now working here, they cover pretty much the broad spectrum of business practice. They go from business processing offices right through to infrastructure, mining, gas and oil exploration, pretty much the full gamut. And so there's a range of opportunities here that we see as looking very, very promising. The reform of the economy too, the economic reforms that are being undertaken also, I think, provide opportunities, and so I think it is a tremendous place for Australian companies to look at. And as much as I look at that, I'm also looking at Filipino companies to invest in Australia.
That's right.
Because
Are
if
you
I can
doing-
increase that, that'd
Yeah.
be tremendous.
Are you arranging some sort of trade missions going to Australia as well?
So we've got an ongoing program with Austrade that takes Filipino firms down to Australia to introduce them to Australian markets, and then brings Australian companies up here to introduce them to Filipino companies and Filipino markets. So it's an ongoing interaction. But I think that holds enormous promise. One of the things I did when I first arrived was to reach out to some of the biggest families and conglomerates here in the Philippines, and I've met about a dozen different groups now, the top companies in the Philippines, and talk to them about the prospects for trade and investment in Australia. And that is really interesting to find out just how much Filipino firms have already looked at Australia and how much investment is going into Australia from the Philippines. It's really promising.
Wow. Okay, before we go into a break, I would just like again to ask, because you mentioned there's about 44,000 Filipinos employed in various industries, but I'm interested, which industries are these aside from BPOs, and what could be the sunrise industries or sectors that you want to grow here in the Philippines?
So they're BPOs, they're mining, they're exploration, they're IT and technology. And there's lots of companies that are up here doing some really marvellous work. Canva, Atlassian, a whole range of Australian companies that are reaching out in novel ways and employing staff, because here the education quality and the product from the universities in terms of the employees that are here is so good. It's a tremendous opportunity for Australian business to use Filipinos to best effect and to go into groundbreaking areas of investment. But the things to watch: education and tourism. I think they're the things that are also really going to grow between us.
Perfect. There's a couple more questions when Open for Business returns with His Excellency Ambassador Stephen Robinson. Open for Business will be back. Stay with us.
Mga kamag-anak, kaibigan at kababayan po namin sa Middle East and North Africa, masayang balita ang hatid po namin sa inyo. Ang Net25 ay makakasama nyo na sa inyong mga tahanan. Mapapanood nyo na ang inyong mga paboritong programa sa pamamagitan ng OSN, ang pinakamalaking entertainment network sa buong rehiyon. Sa Channel 725, maihahatid na namin sa inyo ang mga pangunahing balita at mahahalagang impormasyon. Kaya makisaya, makisalo tuwing umaga at panoorin ang mga programa ng mga hinahangaang celebrities and OPM artists, same day as the Philippines. You can also watch Net25 live and on demand anytime, anywhere on any mobile device on OSN Play. Kaya tawag na sa OSN to learn more on how to get Net25. Sa Net25 on OSN, siguradong at home ka dito.
What's up, everybody? Just like snow in Las Vegas being a rare thing, so are opportunities in life. So whenever they come around, seize the moment. Tune into Digital Nest on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. only on Net25. I'm Ahmed Santos, your EBC correspondent, always one with 25. Peace!
Hello Digital Nesters, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to watch our future features.
Landmarks, Linggo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
Open for Business is back, and of course our topic is strengthening Philippine-Australia relations, and I'm still honored and privileged to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Stephen Robinson, Ambassador of Australia to the Philippines. Ambassador, that was a very interesting highlight of the diplomatic relationship between the Philippines and Australia, and you were one of the we would say superstars of the Philippines when the embassy was awarded with the Embassy of the Year award, and it was very significant because there's just a few of these organizations who are providing awards to embassies and aid agencies who help the Philippines in their sustainable development projects. Yeah. What was it, in that award, that gave the embassy more, inspiration in doing support and aid to the Philippines?
No, thank you. We were very proud that night to receive I think it was the Business Mirror Award for the Embassy of the Year, because that was really quite outstanding, because it was recognition of a lot of work put in by a lot of people, not only in the embassy, but also with our Philippine counterparts, who had all been working together to produce some tremendous outcomes. And the focus for all of that was some of the development assistance work that we've been doing over many years with the Philippines, but particularly in recent times, going to education and peace and prosperity. And how do we develop the education system to enable students to get the best in their lives, to orient them from the beginning of their life in the right way. And so Australia's been really proud to be involved with a range of programs, particularly in the south of the country, that have been really quite critical. Our Pathways to Peace program, which focuses on how do you reorient people who have been fighting against the government over a long period of time, give them vocational and other training and set them off on the path to a different future. How do you focus on K to 3 for the very young students going into the school system to look after them and give them a foundation of skills that set them on the pathway to greater study and greater opportunity. Those things in particular, and our work with the Department of Education, and Secretary Briones was there that night, and it was a great honour to receive the award from her, but in recognition of the work with the Department of Education, DipEd, was tremendous, and we look forward to all of that. At the current time, Australia provides over $80 million a year in terms of development assistance, and more than 50% of that is focused on the south of the country. As we get towards the end of 2019, over 50% will be focused on the south, and it goes to education, as I mentioned before, and then also peace and prosperity, and building the future for the south of the country, particularly after the Bangsamoro organic law was passed. We think that was so vital. Also too, after the Marawi siege, we've donated over $30 million, which I think is 1.2 billion pesos, to the people of Marawi and to the reconstruction efforts around Marawi. And I've been down to Marawi myself 3 times to look at what's happening there with the people, to listen to their issues and to try and provide and channel our assistance in the most effective way to provide partnerships for the future. So it's been an extraordinary time. So that award kind of encapsulated all of the work that the embassy's been doing over quite a number of years, but highlighting the contribution to education, because it is indeed the future for any country, but particularly the Philippines, that's going through such a fascinating time in its development.
Perfect, Ambassador. But a lot of local government units are also interested, who may be interested to tap into the educational projects that you have. What are the parameters for a company or an organization, maybe a local government unit, to tap into this aid that the Australian Embassy is offering?
So we put the development assistance out through a variety of different networks, whether it be the Asia Development Bank, whether it be the World Bank, whether it be government institutions that we work with, to give people the opportunity to tap into that development assistance program. I think the bit that is most important for us, particularly down in the south, goes to the governance and planning support that we're providing, because when you're taking a group of people who have been fighting, as is the case in the south, and turning them from fighters into administrators, that's a pretty significant leap. How do you actually turn somebody from a fighter to an administrator and run a government? And Australia's got a lot of good skills when it comes to governance and planning and assisting the government down south of Bangsamoro government to develop itself to the point where it can administer itself effectively, using all the funds that are coming from the central government up here in Manila. Australia can help in all of that, and we're very pleased to do that. And that's all coming through elements of the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, and government organisations here.
I cannot also help but ask your future directions as far as the infrastructure build program of the government. I've spoken with a lot of government officials and private individuals and companies, and they're really tapping into this.
Yes.
And based on our on the data that's available, you also mentioned that you would want to highlight science, technology, innovation of Australia and lending them to the Philippines.
Yes, that's right. So when I've been going around and talking to the Filipino companies that are looking at investment in the Build program, many of those companies, as they take on the key projects that the government has initiated, are then looking at Australian companies to potentially support them in those construction efforts. So it's not necessarily Australian companies at the forefront, but Australian companies as the critical element supporting Filipino companies in their partnership to work on the infrastructure programs of the government. And so that's really interesting. So we've got a number of Australian companies, Leighton Holdings and others, that are up here, very big names in the construction business, that are working with Filipino companies or conglomerates that have won some of those contracts for the government. So I see that as an enormous opportunity. The science and technology, green cities piece, green energy piece is really important. Smart cities. We've got the CSIRO, which is our Commonwealth research organisation that has cutting edge technology. And if you think about Wi-Fi networks, that was invented by Australia. The whole Wi-Fi that we now exist on came out of Australia, and that's an example of the type of things that Australia has on offer for Filipino companies going into the future. And when I look at some of the startup companies here, I've just met some young people only a couple of weeks ago who are getting into some of the data analytics piece. It is really groundbreaking stuff. You put that together with some of the research that Australia's got, that's really powerful and awesome, the potential that's here by partnering between Australia and the Philippines and some of the young people up here too that are breaking into industry. So I'm very, very positive right across the board about the opportunities that exist here. If I could do the same with trade, that would be really good. I think in terms of our business links, they're pretty good, but there's more to be done. The trade links are the bits that I really want to push, because if you look at the bilateral trade between the Philippines and Australia, it's a bit less than $5 billion a year. Now that's small actually, and for Australia and the
Do you have a
Philippines.
specific projection?
Yeah, well, just to enhance it quite considerably, because when I look at the statistics, Australia is the Philippines' 19th export destination, and the Philippines exports down to Australia gold and electrical machinery.
And the trade volume is about how much?
So it's 2-point-something billion dollars, not so much. And then from Australia to the Philippines, it's wheat and precious metals that comes up here.
Okay.
Now, on the greater scheme of things, when I do the comparison between where does the Philippines sit as against other members of ASEAN in terms of the trade relationship with Australia, the Philippines is about our 23rd trading partner. That's not very good, whereas other members of ASEAN are up between 8 and 12. I really want to boost that trade because it doesn't make much sense.
From 23rd
Well,
to...
if I could get the Philippines even up to 15 from 23, I'd be pretty happy. And so how can I encourage more trade between Australia and the Philippines and more trade from the Philippines to Australia? That would be just wonderful.
I just hope that we can have more time to discuss. But before we let you go, Ambassador, I just have one question. Of course, you mentioned about trade links and ways to really improve commerce and trade between the Philippines and Australia. But there is now a global slowdown. And of course, we cannot help but notice the trade wars that affecting us. So what's your comment on this global headwinds? How can the Philippines and Australia find those opportunities or ways to work around the trade wars that are ongoing now?
So I think that's a really interesting and topical question. Obviously for Australia and for the Philippines, we're all concerned by what we see in the trade battles between the United States and China. All of that is unsettling, and you can see what's happening with the global markets. Our own share market is taking a beating because of the trade war and the announcements that are coming from both countries about tariffs against goods between them. There's two schools of thought really as to how do as a country deal with this. You know, some people would say, and I've heard it said here in the Philippines, that because there's a trade war between the United States and China, that creates opportunities. Now, that does strike me as a possibility, and the Philippines, I think, is going to be arguably less affected by others because of the nature of the Philippines economy and what it offers. For Australia, it might not be so positive, so we're looking with a degree of greater concern, perhaps, than the Philippines is about the trade war. But what we'd like to see is it resolved as quickly as possible. Even if there's a benefit to any country coming out of that, the instability is not a good thing.
Well said, and that's really something that we would really want to look at as we improve the relationship and the strengthening of the Philippine-Australia business relationship. And I hope that we can have you again in the show to talk more about the projects and activities of the Australian Embassy. And before we let you go, Ambassador, if you can address both the Filipinos and Australians who are here in the Philippines and doing business here in the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for having me on today. It's been an absolute pleasure being here and talking today, but to all the Australians and Filipinos out there who are watching, thank you for all you contribute to both the Australian society and Filipino society from our interaction. I'm looking forward to reaching out and meeting as many of you as I possibly can and learning about your experiences and what you do for both of our countries. But it's an absolute pleasure to be the Australian ambassador to the Philippines. Thank you ever so much.
Our term of the week and our quote of the week when Open for Business returns. Stay with us.
How to present in class. You are going to have a presentation in class. Are you feeling worried? Anxious that you might not do well? Worry no more. All you need is to follow a few tips so you'll do a really good job. Here's what you need to do. Plan. Research and prepare your materials and speech ahead of the presentation date. Write. Be confident. Make sure to maintain eye contact when talking in front of your classmates. Stand straight. Stand as proud as you can while presenting. Smile. Enjoy your presentation, and surely your audience will enjoy as well. If you follow these simple steps, surely you will do well in your school presentation.
Behind me is what we call Svalbard, one of the most famous landmarks here in Stavanger, Norway. And if you want to see more of the tourist spots like this, just tune into Digital Nest every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 p.m. I am managing Mihia from Stavanger, Norway, always fun with 25.
Landmarks, Linggo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
In our term of the week, you take a refresher of business terms to make you updated, more informed, and ready to make smarter business decisions. Our term of the week is bilateralism. Bilateralism is the conduct of political, economic, or cultural relations between two sovereign states. It is in contrast to unilateralism or multilateralism, which is activity by a single state or jointly by multiple states respectively. When states recognize one another as sovereign states and agree to diplomatic relations, they create a bilateral relationship. States with bilateral ties will exchange diplomatic agents such as ambassadors to facilitate dialogues and cooperation. Economic agreements such as the Free Trade Agreements FTA or the Foreign Direct Investment FDI signed by two states are a common example of bilateralism. And our word of the week is from Bo Bennett. He said, "Diplomacy is more than saying or doing the right things at the right time. It is avoiding saying or doing the wrong things at any time." Thank you for watching Open for Business. Join us again in the next episodes of Open for Business for more insights from CEOs, thought leaders, and industry experts promoting business development in the Philippines. See you again next Saturday and Sunday for another episode of Open for Business, where we discuss business information, deliver the latest business news to keep you informed and open for business, and be ahead of the curve from vision to action. You're on Facebook Live on Eagle News, and you can watch it again in the video section of Eagle News Facebook page and on eaglenewslive.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Eagle News. Catch me also on Net25's Eagle News International as I join Alma Angeles in reporting more business news here and around the world. For Open for Business, this is Cesar Vallejos. Have a great day.
"50 years ago, 5 visionaries came together to sign the Bangkok Declaration, an agreement that would change the course of history. To ensure peace, prosperity, and harmony, the founding fathers of ASEAN laid the foundation for a community based on shared values. Who were they? Adam Malik, Foreign Minister of Indonesia; Tun Abdul Razak,